What I've pulled up here is from the fidelity reviews, which are a couple of years old now. I pulled up some of the comments that clinicians would make in good faith and meaning well about service users that were on their caseload. And again, there'll be all things that you'll recognise. Things like we need a very gentle, graded approach. There needs shaping of behaviour, lots of preparation. We don't want to entrench failure. And I know they're financially okay, so I won't refer them to work. We only work for money, do we? It's interesting, isn't it? Some referrals are a bit hopeful. A lot of people who need softer outcomes, setting them up to fail. It's a negative thing. They might say they want to work, but they might be lacking in insight. And these were real, things that people said. Employment's a luxury, because often they did it for reasons of kind of caring and wanting to nurture and look after people. They weren't doing it to be mean, they were doing it for what they thought were the right reasons, but it just exposes an awful lot of preconceptions people have about what help people can have and what things people want to do with their lives. I don't think there was one there about when I finish my treatment. I don't think I put that one up there. It's a bit like I'll wait till I know the person's better. So I've treated them and they're better, and then I ask them about work, because it's a separate thing. You only do when you're better. So these were really made us think a lot about what we needed to do with some specific work about attitude and about how can we get from a position of saying IPS is something the employment specialists and the OTs do, but everyone else can just get on with what they were doing, treating people, and when you've treated them, we'll see them get the job. So we thought a lot about what could we do to address that, and training was clearly uppermost in our minds. So we did a kind of train-the-trainer approach. So we trained up the employment specialists and the OTs in each team, and then they cascaded it to the team. And the idea was that it was for everybody in the team. So you couldn't select out to not go to this training, it was part of training for everybody. And it basically, in a fun way, looked at why staff don't talk about work as an option. What is it that stops you as a member of staff from mentioning work? And it was designed to get over the message that work is everybody's business. Do you want to say a bit about what the kind of content was? I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we were quite lucky because actually the Trust made it as a mandatory training as well, so everybody had to attend, which is quite a coup.
Yes.
But it really kind of started on the principles about kind of asking them why they go to work, what the benefits of work. And so when we actually got people talking about kind of their experiences and their motivations, they seemed to be able to kind of like transfer it onto their clients much more easily. But there was real tension in the room sometimes around volunteering, about not taking risks and stuff. And some of that was aired, I suppose. I think a lot of the research is it's better to do a kind of a half a day or a day's training rather than 20-minute presentation, because you can sit there quite quietly for 20 minutes, not saying, and just hold your beliefs in. But actually, some of what we did was lots of exercises, and it kind of got the discussion out, and it kind of got things moving, really, didn't it, as well? There were challenges.
Yes. I'm very fortunate when I was looking at sort of developing the training again. Jeff at the centre suggested, yes, people will have done lots, because I was saying we've done loads of presentations, absolutely stacked of presentations, we do presentations all the time. Why aren't people getting it? And he was saying, well, if you read around the prejudice literature and you see that people's attitude against IPS is prejudice, it's because you haven't spent enough time. Oh, of course, yes, thanks, Jeff. Right, okay, so we need to be spending at least 3 hours, so that was kind of the starting point. And you need to kind of be getting people's attitudes out there. Sometimes it was hard not to go, really? Okay. Yes, next. And I guess just acknowledged as well the facts, and that's why it was developed for an OT and an employment specialist to deliver it. Acknowledge the fact that when I trained in a step-by-step process. I'm an OT. You have the end goal, you make all these steps. Apologies to the group there, you heard me say some things earlier. That's how we get there. We do lots of preparation. This is kind of turning it on its head. So by kind of standing there and acknowledging yourself that it's been a change in your thought process, I think people kind of took that on board a bit better and really took the opportunity to challenge some attitudes about the role of volunteering and that not being a step into paid employment and really help people think.
And it was really good because we could measure the impact of the training as well, even though there's people that kind of did get a bit upset at times from the training. We did notice a real spike. Every time we delivered it, there was a spike in referrals and there was a spike in paid referrals as well. Yeah. So we know it worked. It was uncomfortable at times, but we know the impact of it was very successful.
And it also gives something for the team to refer back to. So if you're kind of holding each other to account in the team and you notice somebody's attitude slipping a bit, you can kind of remind people about the training or say, do you remember that exercise that we did? And it kind of gives people a reason to talk about it again, I think.
And when we visited in team meetings, so the challenge that we set everyone at the end was to ask everybody on their caseload whether they'd like a job or not, and we sort of came back to that in a team meeting, and I started off delivering it in my own team, and I have to say I thought that it wouldn't be a problem because it's my mental health team that I was seconded from, and of course that's going to be absolutely fine. I was quite surprised at some of the attitudes of the people there. Why not just be working here for the last 6 years? It's kind of an eye-opening experience. But coming back to that in a few weeks' time and saying, so you've had those conversations, how did that go? And actually teaching people how to have the conversation as well, I think was a real sort of key, because sometimes people don't know how to start it, and we taught them as well how to respond if someone says, what about my benefits? Because some people won't have that conversation if they don't know the answer to that. What about disclosure? You don't need to know about that, you need to know the employment specialist will sort that out for you. So teaching them some responses to the common questions that service users will bring. And of course, fundamentally, having somebody who's received the service deliver the training just blew any kind of misconceptions out of the water, really, for a lot of people.
I've put up this quote from the person using the employment service. Again, I always think it's important to get back to the people who use the service. Suggestion to engage with employment was a key part of my recovery. If I'd waited till I felt ready to go to work, I might still be waiting. But since the doctor and my OT believed I could benefit from talking to the employment specialist, then I was willing to try. So it's kind of just that, just if someone has a bit of belief. So many of our service users, and again I'm preaching to the converted, don't have anyone who believes in them. And they have, they've been told many times they can't manage things, they're going to fail, it's not going to work. So to have someone powerful like the doctor say, I think you could give it a try, is actually quite important. Sometimes we have to make use of the hierarchies and the power structures that exist rather than trying to rail against them, is actually to think, okay, they'll listen to the doctor, they listen to the psychologist, let's get them on board with our agenda rather than trying to constantly hit them over the head and say, you're not doing what we want you to. I think it's actually about engaging them and actually getting them to think in a similar way to you. It's not doctor bashing, because there are lots of brilliant doctors who really model that for their colleagues, but we know there are calls who don't really want to change the way that they practice, of all professions, like I said, I'm not OT is certainly not all perfect. Two things to finish with, one of which is I hate to say it, because it's very old now, but we did make a DVD as part, we had another bit of money, that we made a DVD called Working Well.
The Options Grid is an international collaborative of experts that come together and developed a grid that you can use. It's for clinicians to use. It's freely available. You can Google options grids, and it's the employment options grid. The idea is that you sit down, and it's a decisional matrix. You use it with a client, and there are staying off work, and there's going back to work with my employment specialist. I hasten to add, it's developed to use if you have an employment specialist in your service. Don't be encouraging people to go back to work with an employment specialist if there isn't one. And it's a very easy tool. There's also supporting evidence behind it that you can get. So it basically tells you why each of the questions is important, how it's based in research, and why you should be asking that. So you can also order pads, but I think the PDFs you can get straight off the Options Grid website.
It's really good for clinicians who aren't that confident about talking about employment, because it kind of goes through things like, it'll say things like, what would happen to my benefits if I go back to work, and it gives you an answer, and it says, kind of, what happens, is there any help or support I can get, and it gives you an answer. So it's quite good for staff who are maybe feeling not confident about talking about employment, because often people like a bit of paper that tells them an answer. I think that's all.
Thank you very much.